when you think about drive-thru coffee, you think speed and convenience, quick transactions. You don't really think about relationships. But what if it could be both? That's what I really wanted to talk to you today about, Darren. For those of you who are listening today on Back to Basics, we're talking with Darren Spicer, the CEO of Clutch Coffee, which is a rapidly growing drive-thru coffee brand that's really challenging this assumption across their 15 units in the Carolinas. So Darren started as a barista at the age of 17, has gone from making drinks to really proving that the fastest service models can also create really meaningful human connections. So Darren, I'm going to toss it to you. Can you introduce yourself, name, title, a little bit about Clutch, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Darren Spicer. I am the co-founder and CEO of Clutch Coffee Bar. Clutch was founded in 2018 in North Carolina. We now have 14 locations across both North and South Carolina. Prior to that, as you mentioned, when I was much younger, I worked as a barista in high school and college, and then got an adult job and a real job. And there was something about the industry that always kept pulling me back in terms of the people and the customer service aspect and just the business model. So while I was doing full-time medical device sales, I was also working towards franchising with a different brand that ended up stopping franchising. And so that's kind of what inspired me to branch off and start my own. And that's how Clutch was born, I guess, almost 7 years ago.
Well, and obviously you saw something that needed to change. Everyone thinks that drive-thru is really just about convenience and consistency, especially when it comes to beverages. What made you decide that just wasn't really enough and that you needed to do something different with Clutch?
So I think you just mentioned the phrase about could it be both? And I would answer it should be both. Mm-hmm. So I think customer service is a lost art form. And as consumers get more educated and have more options, you really have to differentiate yourself and deliver a great experience, right? I mean, I think a lot of quick service retail, we've kind of been conditioned that it's pretty transactional, right? You might order at a speaker board and then you pull up to the window, it'll open briefly to take your money, it'll close, their back will turn, and you're kind of just waiting. And that's kind of like what we've just been conditioned to do. And so early on, with one of the companies that I worked with before, they just really focused on face-to-face interactions. And even as technology advanced, we felt it was really important to still keep that face-to-face interaction. Like, we're human, right? Think about when COVID hit, you wanted to get out of the house and talk to a different face and a different person because so we always crave that. And so
maybe you did.
Fair.
I thrived during COVID.
That's fair. But yeah, just in having that sense of connection. And so how do you blend that with technology? And so we've always just made it a priority that even as technology grows, and we're talking about growing from when we started in drive-thru coffee, the runner position outside was literally writing down an order on a sticky note and running said sticky note in and putting it on the espresso machine and then doing it again. Got lots of steps in. Evolving from that to using a BlackBerry to then texting to now it's on an iPad that you're taking an order outside on an iPad or tablet and it goes in. And so I think that for most people that might be listening, the easiest reference, if you live anywhere in the country, would be Chick-fil-A. However, they're stationary and you pull up to them. Our runners are more dynamic and actually work down the line to go get cars 6, 7, 8, 10 down the line. So balancing that with technology and still having that face-to-face was super important for us. And the bonus on this is that it actually will make your operations faster because you're getting the information inside sooner. People know that you care and you're touching them sooner in the process versus waiting 6 or 8 minutes to get your order taken in the first place.
That's interesting. I didn't really think about that. I'm also still stuck on the fact that it's not the Post-its that caught me. It was the BlackBerry.
It was a real thing. It was a real, or analog texting where it was just you had to hit to get C, you had to press the number 2 3 times to get a C. So then we started shortcutting, M was for medium, S was for small. It was a whole evolution that's kind of happened, but and it will continue. It'll look different in 5 years from now, I'm sure. but still keeping that face-to-face, I think, is really important.
It's incredible, though, because it's really the definition of a lean startup. You're kind of testing different models and seeing what works because you really were doing something different. So you can't walk into it mirroring what's happening today. Sure, you're a drive-through coffee, but you want an entirely different service model. So I guess that leads me to my next question, which is it's easy to imagine what hospitality looks like in a sit-down restaurant. But for you, what does great hospitality look like at a Clutch drive-through experience?
Great question. So we kind of look at it as like we are the host of the party for the 2 to 10 minutes that you might be there visiting us. So it starts with when you turn on to the property. We have surround sound speakers inside and out. So there's music playing. Typically it's up tempo, positive, but like creating a little bit of an ambiance from the time that you turn in, right? Because I think our mantra is we exist to serve positive energy. And that comes in liquid form, of course, but I think it also can come in an emotional form, a mental form as well. And so starting with that experience there of like the ambiance and the energy. And then when we have someone come outside and take your order, and even in the rain, like it was raining yesterday in Charlotte, and we have these like super fun bubble suits that kind of insulate them from things, and customers think it's funny. So, like customer pulls up, like we're there to greet them, right? We're meeting them there. And I think that sets the tone where it's like, I am the priority as the customer, right? Not like, oh, I can see people inside and they're talking and they don't care about me. I'm like, we use this phrase. It's like customers are not the interruption to your work. They are the work. Like that is the focus. So that face-to-face interaction is huge. And then as they're getting that order sent in, they can take the payment. They can talk about what they're up to that day, different talking points while those drinks are being built, right? So you're still having an engaging conversation. And then if you pull up to the window, if there's no other cars in front of you, we have someone whose sole focus is to be on that window position. So they're not leaving and going somewhere. The window stays open the whole day. So they are having an active conversation. And I think all of those little things matter. And then we teach mastering the art of the brief yet impactful conversation. So how can you have a very impactful conversation in like 2 minutes or less?
Is that what a 1 minute win is at Clutch, or is that something different?
It's great. That is very much so what that is. So the 1 minute win is like we measure the amount of time a car is at the pickup window. And the average there we're striving for is a minute or less per car. So if we want customers to be able to look at it and say, oh man, there's 5 cars in line, but I know Clutch moves so quickly that I'll only be here for 5 minutes. Not like, oh, there's 5, I'm going to be here for half an hour. So those are the 1 minute wins. Great pull.
Yeah. Well, I'm always looking for these like really tactical things that people can take with them, especially in an age where the service industry is really changing. Not only is the buyer changing, not only is the employee changing, but just the way that we consume content and therefore food and services is changing. So that's another thing that comes to mind is really, when I was in fine dining, the way that you train someone on how to connect and traditional hospitality training can take years. It's about relationship building. It's about doing research on your customers. It's about going the extra mile. If you have a 1 minute transaction, how do you teach that? How do you teach that kind of genuine connection?
Really good question. I think there's a couple of things that come into play. So one is we just really encourage employees to be themselves. Like we don't want, not to pick on Chick-fil-A now, but like I don't want everyone to be a robot. And if I say if a customer says thank you, you're like, my pleasure, right? Like you can play that game forever, which is kind of fun. But we want them to be themselves, to be genuine in the conversation. So whether they end up talking about what they're doing that day, the weather, the car they're driving, we'll teach them some, hey, if you're looking for conversation topics, like be observant about, like compliments go a long ways too, right? Like, oh man, like love your hair, love your nails. People like to receive that's that emotional positive energy. So I think it's focusing on that. I think the other part with our business that's a little bit more unique than maybe fine dining is like we are a very habitual routine, right? So our regular customers are coming 4 to 5 times a week, sometimes twice a day. And so you're you're building that relationship over time that way versus, versus maybe more lead-in research to something. And you're learning a little bit, sometimes more than you want to know, but you're learning a little bit about them each time. You become invested in their lives, what their kids might be doing. It's kind of wild.
Well, that is really magical about these types of things that we consume, is that there is habit around it. So that actually makes a lot of sense to me that, and I'm sure people have like the specific lane they want to go through because they know that that person's going to be there, what have you, because they make the drink.
Certain baristas make their lattes better. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Their color's right or what have you. Yeah. Well, so staying on this tone of personal connection, because it's something that I hear a lot from CEOs, is how do we automate, but we maintain that kind of really human experience? And this is why I really wanted to talk to you, because you guys have the definition of that challenge. So how do you, just in your role, I know you're visiting stores, but how do you know that your team is making a personal connection? You're scaling fast. So I guess the question is, how do you measure if these connections matter? And is it as important as speed and drink quality?
Yeah, I don't think any one of those attributes can be sacrificed in exchange for another. They all have to work harmoniously. The way we kind of quality control that is a couple ways. One, we have to trust and delegate to our middle management, so to speak, that are going by the stores and that are observing. And I say observing not in a way of like standing there and like staring at them, but just like they're around. They might have some meetings or putting stock away, but they're peripherally watching and listening and seeing how things are kind of moving. That's one way. Another way, in terms of that, is having regular check-ins with our leaders and talking to them and saying, okay, like what are we seeing here? But then we also really look at like what are our customers saying about us online, right? Like and so when customers share feedback on Google, like they're pretty transparent, for better or for worse. Usually it's for the better, but they might say, hey, I was at this store and the girl at the window like wasn't paying attention and we had to wait forever and they just didn't have a great experience. Like it was not a clutch experience. And so those are like, when we respond to people, we'll actually thank them. I'm like, thank you for giving us an opportunity to fix and course correct this. Because if you don't say anything, there's a chance we might not know, right? There's a chance it might continue. So those are opportunities to create wins, and people, and I think they're pretty surprised. Like we respond very quickly on stuff, and when they're like, "Wow, I wasn't expecting a response this quickly, or maybe even at all." So it just shows, I think, that we care. But yeah, we're very in tune with like what customers say, what they're doing, and then also just observing our own teams.
Sure. Well, last question just around the operation and the personnel aspect. And then I want to dive in a bit more on just people development and training, because you're bringing up some interesting points here. Just, you've been in this business for 7 years. What's next for drive-thru coffee? Like, what does next gen look like to you? What are all the coffee CEOs talking about?
The price of coffee? No, it's a really good question. I think you're gonna continue to see product innovation is going to be at the forefront. Mm-hmm. And so like most sizable coffee brands, ourselves included, but even Starbucks will share, or Dutch Bros will share in their releases, that like iced cold coffee, like iced or blended coffee, is like 75 to 80% of the coffee portion of things. So all the promotion you'll see with shaken espresso, which is also just genius marketing for like a latte with a little bit of foam, but like it's amazing. But those, you'll see product innovation. I think using the cold foam, or like we call it sweet top, on our drinks opens up a platform to put other different types of toppings on there. It's almost kind of becomes like at times like a liquid dessert. But it allows people creativity to make something that's their own. They get to express themselves through the $5 or $6 beverage they're going to get. Mm-hmm. So product innovation, I think, will continue to be key. I think you also have brands who are trying to, at least maybe I'm siloed in coffee here, but brands that are trying to emulate best in class on customer experience. or get back to a spot they were before. And so like Starbucks is a good example. Like, we're going to invest in 200,000 Sharpies and start writing names on cups. Great. Like, that's great. We've been, us and other brands, we're not the only ones, has, not just names, but like we'll put like positive words of inspiration or different things on there. Like, we've been doing that. We've never stopped doing that. And I think if you're a brand that hasn't been, you got to be super genuine about whatever your intention is to get there. Otherwise, it just kind of appears to be manufactured a little bit. So I think to answer your question, I think it's product innovation, genuine interactions, and then, your speed still has to be, if you're slow, we're I want it now, society at this point.
Yeah, that's not going to go anywhere. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about like the heart and soul and what happens inside Clutch. Just before this, you and I were talking, most of your team is Gen Z. So what have you learned about training and onboarding that really clicks with this younger generation?
Well, I mean, and this is actually a compliment to Opus, and this is not what I wasn't planning on saying this, to be honest with you, but like visually, I think helps a lot, so they can actually see something before they experience it and before they go into training. So we have them do a certain amount of training and courses. So before they even come in to do it, they've got a certain comfort level that they may not have had just by reading something on paper. So I think that like visual, and it kind of ties in with, think about social media, like video is king. Like, that is the content that people are consuming. It's how they're used to consuming so many other things in their lives. So if you can go down that same route, and we recorded stuff yesterday actually for some training videos to be able to share with them on how to build new drinks we're coming out with, or how to do a new process. So I think that format, being able to visually see, everybody learns differently, but getting to see that helps with the head start. And then just speaking, their language on things, or trying to break it down in a certain way. So those are probably the things that stand out the most.
It's interesting. I was just at the conference for Bahama Bucks, and they have a very similar employee population, like 15, 16-year-olds, different language, different work behaviors. Many of the times you're training these people how to work. It's their first job, which is a totally different. You got to show up on time. You got to have a clean uniform.
Life skills. Yeah.
Exactly. Use both hands when you're cleaning. So, talk to me a little bit about your manager profile, and how you're identifying those potential leaders.
Great question. I think the intangibles are probably the biggest thing you look for. We'll have people apply and they're like, oh, I have this many years of experience in coffee. I'm like, I actually don't care if you have, like, sometimes better if you have no experience in coffee because you have no bad habits to break. But I think it's the intangibles, right? Like, are you a great communicator? Are you accountable? For us, at least, like, do you have a certain level of like energy, and are you energetic? Because if you aren't, and we've experienced in the past where we put someone in a management position and they just weren't outgoing, your crew is going to reflect your behavior typically. So if you're not bringing the energy, it's highly unlikely that anyone else is going to. So I think those are the biggest things. Like, are you, a great communicator? Are you disciplined and accountable? How do you, as that manager, think about managing, leading, inspiring, and like, how do you assess hiring too, right? Like, what, because they're going to, at some point when they spread their wings, they're going to be responsible for hiring on their own.
Right.
And you really have to hope they have the right foundation. So if they have those intangibles and they're coachable, I think that's huge. If they aren't, it makes it a lot tougher to move forward with us, and frankly, probably in a lot of places.
I was listening to this Anthony, the CEO of Bartaco, and he was talking a lot about people development. And he said, 10 years ago is really when the concept of EQ came up. We had gone beyond IQ. It was about the kind of emotional quotient or empathy quotient. And now we're going into AQ, which is adaptability quotient. How fast can your team adjust with the pace of the business, which I think is real in QSR. It's almost like you have to notch up past EQ. It just brings to mind, to your point, like, there's all these intangibles. So what's your favorite interview question, or like what's something that you ask when you walk into the store to kind of suss out like, how things are going?
That's a great question. Man, in terms of how we kind of break it down, I don't know, from an interview perspective, um, I kind of like to ask, uh, you know, what else do they like to do in their spare time? It's a very non-threatening question and allows you to learn more about them and learn and understand like what are they passionate about, right? The answer itself, like sometimes it's not even what they say. It's about like we literally had someone that we interviewed as a manager candidate last week, and our hiring manager Mo asked them. She was like, how would you describe yourself and what do you enjoy to do in your spare time? And they were like, I don't really know how I would describe myself, and like, I don't know, I don't do a lot, and like it didn't even like they could have said, oh, I really enjoy like crocheting, whatever, but it was like you don't have any energy, you're not critically thinking, we're asking you a question, and it kind of put them into the not qualified pool really, really fast. So, and then in terms of like in the store assessing, I don't know if, I mean, I don't know if there's any question we might ask, but it's more visually just assessing and,
Yeah.
and seeing like, what is the energy level? Where are people at? Is the music playing? Are people moving about, or are they quiet? Because customers pick up on that too, right? I mean, you have to give people a reason to want to come back. Hopefully you're delivering a great product, but also, a great experience. So that one's more visual, I think, of like using your own emotional intelligence to understand where the vibe of and the productivity of the store is that day.
And speaking of that word, vibe, there's productivity, there's are you well staffed? But I'm curious, you have a pretty unique background in that you were in medical device sales. Yeah. So like what was there anything that transferred from that or that was kind of surprisingly useful in how you're running Clutch today?
Yeah, actually, the biggest thing that stands out on that is so coming from a medical device sales background is there's a lot of cold calling involved in that. I worked with plastic surgeons and dermatologists and different specialties, but cold calling and it's not exactly cold calling with Clutch, but what they're called community calls. So every week, each store manager is responsible for going out and visiting 3 to 5 businesses in the area. And what we do is like, we'll go visit them, take them a menu and be like, hey, I don't care whether there's 2 people in the office or 25, whatever you guys want to drink, make a list here and we're going to bring it back to you. And we're going to bring you drinks for free. And so it's like, people are like, Starbucks, Dunkin' would never do that. And so it's separating ourselves and actually it's an interesting life skill. This wasn't the intention, but then we're getting our own 15 to 23-year-old employees more comfortable to go out and like strike up a conversation, right? And not be just on their phone doing something, but like, can you go have a conversation and tell someone who you're with and what you're about in a 30-second elevator pitch? And it just builds great inroads in the community and it's not super cost intensive. So yeah, the like doing cold calls has shifted into community calls and community loves, which has been a cool thing for us.
I love that. And it I think what a lot of people don't realize with scaling quick service businesses like yours is that building community is so important. And actually going out, going to schools, going to universities and talking to people is just as important as like a Google ad that you slap up or, a radio ad or what have you. A lot of people find out through word of mouth, but you actually have to get out there and like create the buzz. So, but I also like that there's an after effect where you're actually teaching communication and soft skills too.
Yep. So win-win. They might not realize it in the moment. They're like, I really have to go talk to people. I'm like, yeah. And it's great. I'm like, you're not selling them used tires. You get to go like deliver free drinks and like who's going to say, and who's saying no?
You touched upon this a little bit before, but your team has to nail both speed and connection. And that's a lot to learn. I'm curious to hear what's been a win in moving your team to training online on Opus. Like, what's something that's been useful for you guys personally?
Well, a couple of things. One, it allows us to get them more prepared before they come into training. So they have some like home study and some things to do first. Two, it gives us a faster snapshot. And I'm not even directly involved. I can just tell you because this is like exactly things that our team has shared. But it gives us an exact snapshot in a faster lens of where people are solid at and where they need help and where they need work. And then can you overlay that data to see, wow, like we hired 20 new people and everybody had trouble with one section of the menu. We need to do a better job of framing it because clearly everybody didn't pick up on it. So I think that's really helpful to assess where we're at on both sides, how they're doing, but also how are we doing in terms of creating the curriculum that allows them to see it. And then it's great when we want to roll out a new drink or a new process, like the first thing that our tech team, we don't have a tech team, but like whoever does it, be like, hey, great, let's make an Opus course for it. And that will allow us to get them prepared so that when the new strawberry seduction mocha comes out for February, everybody knows how to build it. And we can say that they've passed this with 100%. And it's not just, something that was written and done. So I think it's allowed us to be much more efficient. We post it to them and they typically have 48 hours to complete it. And it allows us to be time bound and be better with our follow through.
Well, that's interesting too, the way that my eyes got big when you said that, because when you're allowing like 2 weeks or something like that, then the message you're sending is not one of urgency. And you're working in an urgent business where things change. You guys have like monthly LTOs, I think.
Yeah, every month. So they have at least one new course every month.
Yeah. Plus you're growing, so you have new hires. Well, Darren, I could sit and I can talk to you all day. We're going to end with a lightning round so listeners can get to know you a little bit better. I'm going to ask 4 questions and you have to respond in 3 words or less for each question. So I know this is a
Perfect.
challenge for CEOs.
I like it. It's good. It forces you to think about what is the most important.
Exactly. All right. I'm going to start with simple, which is what's your go-to coffee order?
Muscle mocha. It's our signature protein-infused coffee.
That sounds good. What's the last book you read or podcast that you listened to that you really loved?
Book is Shoe Dog. Am I saying that right? I think by Phil Knight. And podcast, Simon Sinek.
I've heard his name a couple of times over the past week. What was your first job ever?
Grocery store bagger.
Good job.
Counting the words.
And what's a new skill that you're working on as a human, as a professional, whatever?
Delegating and trusting.
I feel that.
Big one.
Business owner to business owner. I feel that. Well, Darren, thank you so much for joining us today. This was absolutely wonderful. I love talking to you and really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here anytime.